This is a golden eagle's eye view of the Scottish Highlands. Below is their natural prey, a fast and agile blue hare. He's outmanoeuvred. These are powerful birds, but not as powerful as the sea eagle, reintroduced into Scotland 40 years ago. The trouble is, when they were released, no one told them what they could and couldn't eat. And that's a problem for farmers, because some of these impressive apex predators have got a taste for lamb. A high-protein food source readily available just when the eagles have a nestful of hungry chicks.
We're in Appin in Argyll on the side of Loch Linnhe, and what we're doing today is we're having a look at the continuing story of the sea eagle, the eagle with the sun in his eye, and talking to a local farmer. I've been here, when I say local farmer, they've been here for several generations, and they're hill sheep farmers. And they're one of the monitor farms with Nature Scot and government to look at the impacts of sea eagles and how it affects the sustainability of their flock. So really it's a human story, and it's people that are trying to make a sensible, sustainable living from the land and how they're dealing with the reintroduction of species.
David Colthart dreads this time of year. According to his calculations, he loses around 200 lambs every season to the sea eagles.
It breaks my father's heart to see what's happened to the flock on his side of the hill. And that's what folk don't appreciate. You've got generations of work that went into that within a few short years, that's gone. And it's absolute sin. Absolute sin.
He describes finding a dead lamb at this very spot a year ago.
Fresh blood. The bird lifted off the lamb onto that tree, and it just literally must have killed it in the 20 minutes I was away, but I didn't get my phone out of the pocket quick enough. Just come up and a white-tailed eagle just lifted off this.
David's livestock losses are crippling because he's not just losing the numbers, he's losing the lamb's innate survival skills. These sheep know their own little world. They're hefted here. Their mothers taught them, and their mothers taught them where to find food and where to find shelter to survive in this environment.
Some of these folk don't understand how a hill flock actually works. It's actually pretty special when you've got some sheep that live on the top of the hill and some sheep that live on the bottom. The sheep that live on the top of the hill, they'll always go back there. That's their own territory. Now, if you take the lambs away from them, the female lambs especially, then there's nothing to replace them, and eventually it dies out. And it's just not a case of just taking something from here and putting it there and expecting them to do the same job. It just doesn't work like that.
What are we actually talking about? What sort of losses are these unsustainable losses? What do they look like in numbers?
Last year it was 32% was the loss from scanning to weaning, and that's far too much for a farm to sustain. Not for the level of inputs we put into it. Like when my grandfather was here, the sheep were never fed. They were genetically hardy, and okay, you have periods where you have maybe a bad winter, but a stock that doesn't have like a predator like the white-tailed eagle nipping away at it can then maybe take a couple of years to recover, but it can recover.
Nature Scot have now acknowledged the issue and have spent time in these hills monitoring the eagle's activity. They've tried things like diversionary feeding and more shepherds on the ground, but nothing works, and David still can't protect his flock.
It's not been through lack of effort from Nature Scot and the observers and ourselves, and that's a great shame. It's not the birds' fault. We didn't release the birds in the first place. They've been introduced into an environment that's totally changed in the last year. It's not nature that's feeding the birds, it's the farm and the crofters.
Another tactic we filmed was designed to shoo the sea eagles away from the lambing fields. This is the Angry Man, a siren blaring orange inflatable.
There you go. That's it.
Neil, what is happening?
That's the Angry Man.
He looks like a drunk man, not an angry man.
Well, the wind's pushing that one over, but that's the idea, is it leaps up and there's a whistling noise. Listen. That's it.
That was it?
That was it.
And that will have done what?
Well, the idea is that if the sea eagle is in the area hunting the lambs, that the Angry Man popping up, whistling and waving his arms around will be enough to deter the eagle from hunting the lambs on the bank. To me, it generates a whole host of questions, David, because I mean, we've known for a long time, well, certainly for the last 10 years, that the amount of impact of sea eagles on lambs here has been steadily increasing. We're also aware that the sea eagle population itself is steadily increasing. There's been a very long debate that sea eagles don't take perfectly healthy, viable lambs. But I think for the majority of people, other than the sort of the environmental evangelists, the fact isn't really challenged now. So the idea is that products like that will reduce the impact on lambs by disturbing hunting birds away from lambing areas. You could say I remain to be convinced.
Maybe the eagles are supposed to fall out of the sky laughing, but this is not a laughing matter. The signs of an attack are obvious from a distance.
So as you can see, the eagle sat on top of the knoll over on your right there. And this is very typically what we'll find. You can see round the carcass they've been plucking out, and you can see the loose wool from the carcass here. When you look at the side of the head here, you can see the very distinct talon strike in the neck. See it there? And then you've got a very distinct talon strike on the side and the back here. And we actually look inside at the internal organs. You can see that the lung and part of the heart has got the strike on it from the beak. And this is all very classic. You can see the way the ribs are broken out. That's absolutely classic of an eagle kill on a lamb.
So this is not carrion?
No, this is absolutely not carrion. And we've just spoken to a guy passing an van just now that said to us that he was working in the area yesterday morning and saw them flying with a lamb and dropping it. So this is a daily occurrence here. Every morning there's 1 or 2 lambs disappearing out of this area. And you've got to look at it long term and say that a solution has to be found here that works for eagle conservation and also works for local farmers and crofters.
Sea eagles are not the only predators targeting newborn lambs. Foxes, badgers, crows and ravens are also looking for a meal. We filmed this farm on the Isle of Wight a few years ago.
So here's a classic example.
Again, the farmer was losing 200 lambs a year to crows, which can be controlled, and ravens, which are protected. Corvids are far more brazen than eagles, waiting close by for a ewe to give birth before attacking the newborn. Some aren't that patient, and we're too late to reach this stricken ewe.
So we watched the sheep from the other side of the valley with the long lens. You see she's trying to give birth, had a bit of a problem, so we had to come and give her a hand, and that lamb was eaten alive in the process. Eyeballs and its tongue are gone, so even if it had survived it wouldn't be able to feed. They've also, whilst the ewe's been laid on her side, they've also tried pecking at her back. It's either in the back or in the lower abdomen that they go for, because they know where the lambs are inside them, and they'll open them up, quite literally do a caesarean whilst the ewes still alive.
Back in the Highlands, and David didn't ask for sea eagles to be reintroduced, and yet he and other West Coast farmers are suffering the consequences of that particular headline-grabbing government initiative.
There's some birds that are going to predate on lambs and there's nothing going to stop them. There's probably plenty of birds out there that are not having any effect on farm livestock, but some that they do, and that's the real big issue, and that's the ones that really have to be, we have to deal with them in one way or another.
Incredibly, he has no power to protect his livelihood, and he's not receiving any compensation for his losses.
Suggestions made by the environmentalists is that the poor performance of sheep on the west coast of Scotland is due to generations of overgrazing and overburning, and it's the fact that the ground won't sustain them anymore. What would you say to that assertion, though? It's not eagles, it's just poor performing sheep.
I think if there's any poor performance sheep, it's down to the birds, so I think that's a load of bunkum.
We asked Nature Scott if they would compensate farmers. We were told the Sea Eagle management scheme is not compensatory, as confirming specific damage, the exact cause, and the scale of that damage is difficult to do. They also said, Nature Scott is committed to continuing to run the Sea Eagle management scheme this year to provide support to farmers and crofters affected by predation, and we are currently finalising the details. David says this is not good enough. Farmers need help now to try and keep these rogue birds off their livestock, otherwise they'll be the ones driven to extinction.